And now, an Envision Financial podcast with Luke Smith on Canberra's 2CC.
Luke Smith, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
If only listeners could hear our conversations before we turn the microphones on.
Well, we were just sort of mulling over the weather, weren't we?
Not only that, but the passage of time. I know that often you come here on a Friday afternoon and you say, well, where did the week go?
Yeah.
Well, today we were wondering, where did the last 6 years go?
Well, sort of we both agreed that, that COVID block sort of, I think there were two or three that got sort of mushed into one there.
Yes.
And, differentiating when things happen gets a bit sort of hazy between those timelines.
Exactly.
So it's frightening to think we're, nearly the end of
time is
July.
Rapidly advancing. Yes, the end of the financial year has come and gone, and you've got to start thinking about getting your tax returns in now before the deadlines. And
correct,
lots of things to keep thinking about. And we're not talking about any of those today.
No, not at all.
Today we're talking about a transition to retirement pension, and how you can use that to reduce your debt and boost your super at the same time. How do you do it? Sounds like magic, Luke.
Well, not really, but, it's just the law, and we want to use the law to our advantage. And, leading into 30 June, we talked about deductions and ways to sort of do things. And we're just highlighting now that there are legislation that's available to us that we can use now, because a lot of people go, 30 June's over, everything's finished. Well, this is just a reminder that now we're in a new financial year. Now you can look to take another 10% out of your superannuation under the transition to retirement rules for a range of different reasons. And we'll just sort of talk about why and how. And it's probably a good segue into, well, we know that you can take your pension provided you meet certain conditions. Those conditions are you're at preservation age, so generally speaking over 60. You haven't finished work, so you can take between 4% and 10% of the balance of your account over the financial year. Now, a lot of people make the assumption that when they hear the word pension, they think fortnightly amount. When in actual fact, the word pension doesn't mean fortnight. The word pension has nothing to do with frequency. The word pension simply means that your accumulated super has been moved into an income stream and you have the ability to take a certain amount of money out. Now, how you take that out is completely up to you. But if I was over 60 and still had some residual mortgage floating around, some kids' school fees, you wanted to lower the debt on an investment property, you wanted to pay off a car lease, you want to buy a new boat, you wanted some new Jordans, whatever your reason is, remember that this legislation is at your disposal, where you could say, okay, I've got $500,000 in super, I could take up to $50,000 and take that out immediately. So if you've got non-deductible debt on your home, it's a great way to pull tax-free money out and pay that down. And I've had a few of those conversations today this week where I've said to people, what's your priority? We really want that gone. Okay, well, let's take that because you're over 60 and pay that down. Because if you pay down a $50,000 debt with tax-free money from super, you've got to earn a lot more, depending on your marginal tax rate, to achieve the same net benefit. So it's a very cost-effective way to extinguish debt. It's also a wonderfully cost-effective way to generate deductions. And we've spoken about this in the past, where you've got $32,500 of space in your concessional cap, and you might have $20,000 of super contributions. So you've got $12,500 of space that you haven't used potentially in this financial year. So using the transition to retirement legislation could be a great way to generate an amount of money coming out on a tax-free basis, only to then be put back into superannuation for potentially you and a partner, and then use that money to claim a tax deduction, which can reduce your assessable income in this current financial year. So think about the transition to retirement legislation not just as a way to pay off a mortgage, or not just as a way to say to your boss, hey, I really like coming in here. I'd really love it even more if I could come in 4 days a week. And then you might say, well, I'm going to go and lose 20% of my remuneration. In strolls transition to retirement, who's your best friend, and says, well, why don't you use me to supplement the money that you've foregone by moving to 4 days a week, or 3 days a week, or a 9-day fortnight, or whatever it is that floats your boat. because you don't want to go and work on a full-time basis any longer. This transition to retirement legislation was actually created to give people some incentive to stay in the workforce, because we have an ageing population. And when this legislation was passed, we had a significant outflow of people at a certain age bracket where a lot of the knowledge of an institution was leaving. And this legislation was created to give people some incentive to say, well, I wouldn't mind staying on. I just don't want to work 50, 60, 70 hours a week. And that's how this sort of came to be. But you can use it to your advantage for a number of different things, some of which we've highlighted just now in relation to the application of the money. But I just want people to remember that just because 30 June has come and gone doesn't mean that it's not an opportunity now to use legislation that's available so that you can get the outcome that you're after and manage your debts or your deductions or your shoe collection any way you see fit.
I still find it's almost like black magic that you can take money out of your pension fund, your superannuation fund, because you put it into a pension phase. You take it out, and then you put the exact same amount back in again, and you get a tax deduction for it. That's black magic, isn't it?
Pretty good. I'd say it's smart. It's not about black magic, but I'll take it.
Yeah, but okay. So
I never thought of myself as a magician.
I think that comes close. It really does.
Now, I also preface that by saying
there are obviously rules around how that's done.
Yeah, that's right. But you also need to keep in mind as well, when you say put it back in, you need to put it into another account.
Yeah.
So in that situation where we had 500 grand in the example, we've started a pension with our entire account. Now, be mindful that if you start a pension, you cannot add to its capital value without stopping the pension. So what I would recommend people consider is, if you had 500,000, start a pension with 490,000. and leave $10,000 in your existing super fund, because your employer is going to need somewhere to keep putting your superannuation guarantee.
So you then effectively have two accounts. You have the accumulation account and the income account.
Exactly right. So you'd have $10,000 left in your super fund and payments coming in from work, and you'd have $490,000 in a transition to retirement account. Now, there's no impact on the underlying investments. It's not a tax event. You don't have to sell anything. You don't have to divest yourself. It just transfers over with the provider that you are with. You then say to that provider, hey, I'd like 10%, please, being paid immediately into this nominated bank account, and they would facilitate that. You could then take the appropriate amount of that pension payment and put it back into the account with $10,000 left in it, and claim up to your available cap space. Or in an example where you may be under 500,000, you could use multiple years of catch-up space by looking backwards 5 years. So that legislation comes into play as well. And you could claim a deduction. So it's a really, really good way of having access to capital for a raft of reasons that is not overly difficult to execute. It doesn't cause a tax event. You're accessing money on a tax-free basis over 60. You must lodge some paperwork with the fund, so you'd need to go to your provider and say to them, I'd like to start a pension, please. What do you need? And they will ask you, are you over 60? Yes. How much would you like to put into the pension? You can choose. There's no fixed amount. Like I say, leave 10 just so that the account's open. If you feel safe having 20 or 50 or like whatever you need, great. If you want to start a pension and you only need a certain amount of money, you may only start a pension with the appropriate amount of capital. I need 20,000. Okay, I'll roll over 200,000 of my 500,000 and take 10%. You can do that as well. You can start multiple pensions provided that your provider allows it. And that's very advantageous inside something like a self-managed super fund. So you need to be able to do it with your provider. So check that first. You need to complete the necessary paperwork with them to tell them how and what you want. They will then facilitate that, and you will receive that money in your hot little hand. And you can park that money in an offset against a loan, pay some school fees, pay out a car, buy some shoes, whatever it is you need to do. But remember that because you're over 60, there is no tax implication for you to draw that money out. So $20,000 from $200,000, you might need to earn 30 to get that in wages. So it's a very cost-effective way of using accumulated super. Now, people go, oh, but my super will go down. Yes, that's pretty obvious. That shouldn't be a surprise. However, if you're putting it back in on this side and now your taxable income is falling, you're just topping up one account and pulling down another and getting a tax benefit. And you could do that for you and your spouse. Wonderful. You might then put the money in, claim the deduction, and then super split it to the older spouse. That might be a strategy as well. So there's a range of things that you can then start dovetailing into it. But I just want people to know it's there, because too often people come in and go, oh, I've got this on the home and I'd love it gone. And I go, well, why don't you use transition time? Oh, because I haven't quit. The whole point is you're transitioning. You don't have to. So it's a really, really cool strategy that people can take advantage of for a raft of reasons.
Indeed, that is the magic. You don't have to quit your job. You can just access it anyway.
Beautiful.
Indeed. Luke Smith from Envision Financial is with me in the studio today, and we're talking about using a transition to retirement pension to reduce your debt and boost your super all at the same time. No, it's not black magic, it's just common sense. Luke Smith from Envision Financial is with me in the studio today. We're talking about using a transition to retirement pension to help cut debt, boost super, and, well, you know, do whatever you like with the excess, I guess, basically. So what are the key things for people to remember?
Well, I think first of all you need to think about why you're doing it. Just because a piece of legislation is there to be used, you want to have the right reasons and the right why. You know, so think about the benefits to your situation. I think then you need to think about, well, if I am going to put a contribution back in, what type of contribution am I going to use? Am I making a deductible contribution, as we said before the ad break, where I want to lower my taxable income? Or am I maybe thinking about a recontribution strategy where I want to add tax-free money into another account to bolster up the estate planning control of a second fund where I've put money in as a tax-free contribution, which would mean then that on my death it would go to my non-dependent children on a tax-free basis. So there are a range of applications for the legislation and why you may or may not do it. And I think that's your starting point is, well, why am I going to do it and what are the benefits that I want to try and get out of it? Yes, you can pay down the non-deductible debt. Yes, you can pay down investment debt. Yes, you can pay school fees. Yes, you can make deductible contributions. Yes, you could make non-concessional contributions. There's a raft of reasons why you would do it. We need to keep in mind that you need to be over preservation age. You need to access between 4 and 10% of your balance. You'd need to keep a super fund open, as we said prior to the break. If you've got $500,000 in the fund and you start a pension with $500,000, work's going to have a problem because you now no longer have an open accumulation account for superannuation guarantee payments. So leave leave the minimum, generally $6,000, but leave an account open and take a large portion of what's in your super to start the pension and run 2 accounts. It doesn't affect the underlying assets because when you start a pension account, they'll ask you, well, how do you want this to be invested? So if you are balanced over here, you can be balanced on the right. That's fine. You can change it, you can tweak it, but it's not a tax event to start the pension, which is great. I think you also then need to keep in mind as well that if you have insurance through the account, leave some money in there because some funds don't allow you to maintain insurance in a pension structure and that could result in you losing insurance. So be mindful of that. Check your fund's rules before you start the income stream. And if you need to leave some money in there so you've got a couple of years of premium and you want to retain the insurance, do that. I don't think running 2 funds is bad. A lot of people make some generalities that, oh, it's 2 funds, twice the fees. But if you think about it, most funds charge a percentage of the balance. So if you've got $500,000 across 2 accounts, is it really that different?
It's not.
Exactly. So, don't listen to these old wives' tales because I don't think anything positive comes from making assumptions. It's a really good way to try and gain control of your cash flow. If you want to reduce your work hours, great way to supplement lost wages. So if you went 4 days a week and you've lost 20% of your remuneration, you can use the transition to retirement legislation to keep your cash flow at a similar level. That's wonderful. And I think it's really important that people, again, do the math. Understand what you're going to get out of it, because if you lose 20% of your wages, you're talking about gross wages, not net wages. So you may not need the same exact amount because there is no tax paid on transition to retirement money, so you could get a little bit of value when it comes to the net difference between pre-tax and after-tax wages. So I think if people just go into that with an understanding of what they're working with, they can have some wonderful outcomes and suit their situation.
So, Luke, where can people get more information?
So office number 6260-4749. We've got envisionfinancial.com.au on the internet. We've got the Strategy Stacker. Luke Talks Money on iTunes and Spotify. And we've got Envision Financial Canberra on YouTube, where you can watch all of our back catalogue. And we've got Smart Money Strategy, your ultimate guide to financial planning, where there's an entire chapter on transition to retirement.
Thank you so much. We'll catch you next Friday.
See you next week.
Luke Smith from Envision Financial, back again at the same time next week.